Swimming, Palermo, Sicily, 1953. A young teenage boy, lean and tall, burst waist-high into the air from out of the crystal blue sea and shook his thick black hair clear of the excess water that made it cling to his forehead. Water trickled down his sun-bronzed face into his blue-gray eyes. He looked around to get his bearings, treading water and squinting his eyes tightly due to the intense midday sun which sat high and bright in the clear blue sky of a Mediterranean summer. The heat seared dry the salt onto his face. He closed his eyes and, whilst gently paddling his legs and arms, held the moment in his mind. The sea was warm and silk-like. He looked up and the light blazed through his closed eyelids, glowing painful orange blobs. He opened his eyes and again took his bearings. He had drifted too far out to sea for comfort, so started to swim back towards the beach. He headed towards the Cimitero ai Rotoli, a spectacular circular cemetery that lay at the base of Mount Pellegrino. It was a large beige patch of dusty earth, littered with old stones, that sloped downwards from the base of the mountain. It reached the edge of the bay where a rocky ledge dropped into the soft, sparkling aquamarine sea. Behind it rose a sheer brown mountain face, above which sat the Castello di Vergine Maria. The Castello was a grand palace in the Italian Baroque tradition, built a few centuries ago. It stood in supreme regal dominance over the sea on the northeast coast of Sicily between Palermo and Mondello. Above it, thought Gio, was only sky, sun, moon, God, and somewhere my mother. During the scorching, arid summer months when Gio was not at school, he would often accompany his father, Ernesto, to the Castello di Vergine Maria, where he would spend his days playing amongst the dusty olive and orange groves of the estate. He loved to climb the steep, rocky crags up to the old, decaying monastery on the top of the mountain, explore long-forgotten caves, or perch precariously like a bird on the fragile stone ledges that jutted out like diving boards along the edge of Mount Pellegrino. Here he could dream away the summer wondering what his future held. He spent hours watching the old wooden fishing boats far below coming and going from Palermo harbor. Above all things, Gio loved to swim and spent every possible day free-diving and snorkeling amongst the rock pools in the warm blue sea that blessed these craggy shores. He would spend countless hours diving for fish, swimming alongside the tuna boats or laying on the hot rocks baking in the sun, watching lizards skittering alongside him before nervously darting behind a rock or into the nearest outcrop of cactus. He especially liked the fact that he could see the cemetery where his mother was buried, and at the same time the castello where his father was working. It made him feel they were still a family, still connected, still together. Ernesto Belando was the head gardener at the Castello di Vergine Maria. He was incredibly proud of the gardens he had created, especially the orange and lemon groves which had become famous throughout the region. The gardens were verdant and luxurious, watered at great expense from a private concrete reservoir the owner, Sergio Rossi, had installed high on the mountain. The Castello was surrounded by miles of twisted, tortured, dusty tracks that ran precariously across the vast, sugarloaf-shaped mountain. The Via Pietro Bonanno crisscrossed Mount Pellegrino like an old, coiled rope. Despite the devotion Ernesto had for the groves, Sergio Rossi was ambivalent to his achievements. To Sergio, the groves were simply a cash crop, an income to supplement the substantial cost of running the estate. Ernesto lived alone with his son Giuseppe, or Gio as he was usually called. They lived in a small, whitewashed cottage a few miles from the main house. Ernesto's wife had died many years ago when Gio was 5 years old, and whilst Ernesto had grieved for a long time and declared never to remarry, he was still a warm and generally content man who had accepted the fate life had dealt to him. He believed a simple, honest life was a good one. Father and son rubbed along together without any great difficulties in life. Ernesto only ever felt the deepest love for Gio, though even at such a young age he already recognized within him the same striving, unsatisfied restlessness of his mother. Times had been hard for all Sicilians after the war. It was a poor country, almost entirely based upon agriculture and fishing, and although the pay was small for a gardener in the early 1950s, there were certain privileges afforded to him and Gio that made it a far better choice than the grueling existence Ernesto would have endured working in the tuna factories. Unlike many of the villagers who resented Sergio Rossi's immense wealth, Ernesto was grateful for the small home that came with the job and the safe, comfortable existence it afforded them. Sergio Rossi was a rich Sicilian from an old family of nobility. He had made a great fortune in shipbuilding during the war, and afterwards had branched into tuna. Though now in his early 50s, he was still tall, slim, bronzed, and adequately, though not inelegantly, muscular. He retained the poise and posture of a much younger man. He had thick black hair and piercing blue eyes that shone like two beads of Murano glass from a handsome, rugged, but gentle face. As head of the Rossi family, he was the owner of the largest tuna shipping fleet and canning company in Sicily. He had had the good fortune to inherit a number of large fishing boats at the age of 14, and after 5 years of hard work expanding his fleet, he began to take an active interest in motorsports. This ultimately led him into a brief but notable career as a semi-professional racing driver. After that, he disappeared for a time and resurfaced at the start of the Second World War as a shipbuilder with a number of very lucrative contracts to make small marine patrol vessels. It was also rumored that he made a sizable fortune smuggling people to Morocco. After the war, he emerged as one of the biggest shipbuilders in Sicily and dominated industrial tuna canning, which he had made into a profitable export business. He had fought his way to become one of the most successful men in Sicily. A good deal of mystery surrounded the true extent of his business holdings, which were vigorously defended by a small army of lawyers based in Rome. It was said, by some of the staff at the dinner table, that even the Italian government had been unable to discover the origins and depths of the Rossi fortune. Sergio had bought the Castello di Vergine Maria about 20 years ago and had spent a considerable amount of time and money restoring it into a more comfortable residence whilst conserving much of its former glory. Hurtling around the long, dusty private roads in one of his expensive Italian sports cars was his favorite pursuit, and despite the damage he did when he occasionally skidded off the road into the trees, he was an expert driver. Other than the donkeys used to carry the baskets of harvest fruits to market, or supplies to the monastery, the roads on Mount Pellegrino were almost exclusively used as Sergio Rossi's personal racetrack. For him, there was simply no better passion for a man to devote his life to. He was proud of the fact that he'd only killed 2 donkeys in all the years he had been there. "How many times must I tell you?" he would yell at the staff. "Driving automobiles at such high speeds is both dangerous and reckless. Get out of my way in future, can't you?" Sergio maintained the idea that it was the workers' fault that he had swerved and lost control of his car. He felt it a benevolence towards them that he impart a warning, and believed his words would serve as an important lesson if they were to ever take up racing. Although he no longer took part in professional racing anymore, the workers around the estate said that he had once been a great champion and that he still participated in the illegal, unpublicized road races. Unofficially, of course. Very little was known about the illegal road racing circuits up in the mountains of Sicily, and participation was strictly by invitation only. Rumors had it that Signore Rossi both organized and took part in these deadly midnight races. Ernesto never indulged in gossip about rich men, as he knew good jobs in these parts rarely came and could very quickly go. For many years, the supercars of Sergio Rossi had gone almost completely unnoticed by Gio. Occasionally, he would hear the ear-shattering roar of a distant engine